What if I told you that 3 tiny islands, so small you could walk across them before lunch, were quietly holding the entire global economy by the throat? And what if I told you that in just 1 week, the United States moved in and started peeling that grip away, finger by finger, while most of the world was staring in the wrong direction? Stop for 1 second before I go any deeper. If you actually want to follow this story the way it deserves to be followed, hit that subscribe button and smash the like. Not as a favor to me, but as a favor to yourself. Because this story is moving faster than the news can keep up, and I promise the next twist is going to be even bigger than what you already heard. Now, let's talk about the water. There's a place on this planet called the Strait of Hormuz. Most people have never heard the name. Fewer still could point to it on a map. But every single day, roughly 1/5 of the entire world's oil and gas squeezes through it. Think about that. 1/5 of the fuel that keeps cars running, planes flying, factories humming, and homes warm passes through a channel that, at its narrowest point, is only about 33 kilometers wide. That is barely wider than a mid-sized city. It is a bottleneck for the entire modern world. On one side of this narrow water, you have Iran. On the other side, you have Oman and the United Arab Emirates. Tankers from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and Iran itself all funnel through the same tight lane, day after day, year after year. And sitting almost directly on top of that lane, like 3 watchtowers built by nature herself, are the islands that started all of this. Greater Tunb, Lesser Tunb, and Abu Musa. If you added all 3 of them together, they would cover less than 10 square miles of dry land. Some of them you could cross on foot in under an hour. On a satellite photo, they look like nothing. Just a few dusty freckles floating in blue. But location is everything in this world. And location is what makes these 3 specks of rock more valuable than gold. Whoever holds them can watch every ship. Whoever holds them can, in theory, reach out and touch every tanker that dares to pass by. And since 1971, the country holding them has been Iran. That year, right before the United Arab Emirates was even born as an independent country, Iranian forces moved in and planted their flag. The UAE has never accepted it. For more than 50 years, they have raised the issue in international meetings, in courtrooms, and speeches, but nothing changed. Iran stayed. And slowly, quietly, patiently, Iran did something else. It turned those 3 little dots into fortresses. Reports say that over the decades, Iran layered them with coastal radar, missile storage, launch pads for small, fast attack boats, and air defense systems designed to blanket the entire strait. Iranian officials themselves have reportedly called these islands their own unsinkable aircraft carriers. Think about the confidence in that phrase, unsinkable. Because you cannot torpedo an island. You cannot sink a piece of the earth. It just sits there, watching, waiting, armed. Researchers who study Gulf security have described this island chain as part of a layered shield, a defensive net built to make the strait almost impossible for any outside power to move through without Iran's permission. Picture it for a moment in your head. Greater Tunb sits about 30 miles off Iran's coast and roughly 50 miles from the UAE, right along the path that loaded tankers use when they enter the Persian Gulf. Abu Musa sits a little further along, watching ships even before they reach the tightest squeeze of the strait. Lesser Tunb rests in between the 2, filling the gap. Together they form an overlapping net where almost no vessel can slip through without falling into the range of at least one of them. That is why 3 rocks, each smaller than most city parks, have shaped the price of oil for half a century. For decades, nobody really touched them. They were treated as background scenery, a footnote at the bottom of longer stories about the Middle East. And then, in the middle of July 2026, that quiet ended. According to reporting from CNN, the Associated Press, and multiple Gulf news outlets, the United States military launched a wave of strikes against Iranian military positions. And among the targets, sitting right in the crosshairs, were Greater Tunb and Abu Musa. One of those strikes reportedly lasted around 90 minutes and hammered what U.S. Central Command described as coastal defense systems and missile-related infrastructure sitting on Greater Tunb itself. And here is where the story stops being a simple headline and turns into something much larger. Because the islands were only one piece of the puzzle. What officials describe publicly, and what analysts piece together afterward, points to something coordinated. A campaign that pulled together the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Navy, and, for what may be the first time in this kind of role, unmanned robotic vessels moving across the water without any crew on board. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly how modern warfare at a place like the Strait of Hormuz actually works, and why what happened here matters far beyond one region and 1 week. To understand why the United States went after these tiny islands, you have to understand what Iran has been using them for. This was never about a few rocks in the sea. This was about controlling a choke point that the entire global economy silently depends on. Iran's naval strategy has never been about matching the U.S. Navy warship for warship. Iran does not have that kind of fleet. It never has. Instead, according to research from groups like the Congressional Research Service, Iran built what analysts call a mosquito fleet. Thousands of tiny, blistering fast boats that can hit speeds well over 40 knots, armed with machine guns, rockets, and, in some cases, anti-ship missiles that could ruin a much bigger vessel's day. The logic behind it is simple, even if the reality is messy. One small boat cannot sink a modern warship or a giant oil tanker on its own. But imagine 20 or 30 of them roaring across the water from every direction at once. Suddenly, you have a nightmare of tracking, targeting, and reacting all at the same time. Analysts describe it as swarming a target's attention until something slips through. It is a strategy of speed and numbers rather than firepower. And here's the part that hits your wallet, even if you live thousands of miles away. Iran does not actually need to sink a single tanker to change the game for everybody. All it needs is for shipping companies and insurance firms to believe that something bad could happen. If insurance premiums for ships passing through the strait climb high enough, some companies will simply stop sending their vessels through. And just like that, without a single missile flying, the flow of oil begins to slow. Fear becomes a weapon. Doubt becomes a blockade. Iranian officials, according to state media reports, have said publicly that they have kept upgrading this fast boat fleet for years, with newer versions reportedly reaching higher speeds than earlier models. Some Western estimates suggest Iran still holds on to a significant chunk of this fleet even after weeks of conflict, though those numbers have not been independently confirmed and should be handled with care. But this playbook is not new. Iran used similar swarm tactics all the way back in the tanker war of the 1980s, when both Iran and Iraq targeted commercial shipping in the Gulf to squeeze each other economically. The same hidden coves, the same short hops between islands and shipping lanes. Decades of experience in this exact water is part of what makes this fleet so hard to shake, even for a much larger and more advanced military. It is not a shiny new weapon. It is an old idea, sharpened and updated with faster boats and better missiles. Now, this is the environment those three islands support. The radars on Greater Tunb and Abu Musa reportedly help Iranian forces spot ships as they approach the strait. Missile systems based there stretch Iran's reach far beyond its shoreline. Take out that infrastructure, and you do not erase the fast boat problem completely, but you weaken the eyes and shorten the arm behind it. And that brings us right back to what unfolded across several days in mid-July 2026. According to Central Command statements and reporting from multiple outlets like CNN and The National, the U.S. carried out repeated waves of strikes against Iranian coastal and island targets. On July 13th, strikes reportedly landed on locations including Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Kangan, Abu Musa, and Bandar Abbas, a major Iranian port city sitting right on the strait itself. Then, on July 15th, U.S. forces reportedly ran a 90-minute strike specifically on Greater Tunb, described by officials as targeting coastal defense systems and missile-related infrastructure. Iranian state media reported hearing explosions on several islands during that stretch, including Keshem and Hengam, along with activity near Bandar Abbas. Not every single one of these details has been fully verified, and in an active conflict, every claim from every side deserves a careful eye. But the overall pattern, reported by multiple independent outlets, is impossible to ignore. Repeated strikes over consecutive days aim squarely at Iran's ability to threaten shipping through the strait. One detail jumped out at analysts who study this closely. Earlier strikes in the conflict reportedly happened mostly at night, under the cover of darkness. The July 15th strike on Greater Tunb reportedly began in daylight in the early morning hours. Analysts have suggested that a shift like that carries a message of its own. It signals confidence. It signals that whoever is running this campaign no longer feels the need to hide. Officials have not directly confirmed that reading, but the timing did not go unnoticed. Quick pause here, because if this is genuinely helping you make sense of a story that has been thrown around with a lot of noise, do me one small favor. Tap that like button right now and drop a single word in the comments telling me which part of this has surprised you the most so far. It genuinely helps this careful, sourced version of the story reach more people than the loud, dramatic guesses floating around out there. All right, let's keep going, because this is where things get even more interesting. Alongside the island strikes, something else was quietly happening that might, in the long run, be even more important for the future of warfare, even though it got less attention in the headlines. Reports from outlets including CBS News and specialist defense publications describe an operation in mid-July near Bandar Abbas involving unmanned surface vessels. In plain English, small robotic boats that operate without a single human on board. According to these reports, a company called Saronic Technologies has developed a vessel known as the Corsair, and the U.S. Navy has reportedly placed large orders for these systems over the past 2 years. Central Command reportedly confirmed that vessels of this type were used in an operation near a maintenance facility linked to Iran's submarine fleet. Footage released alongside the announcement reportedly showed a vessel under repair, and then the video ended. Now, it is important to be clear. Some of the specifics about that operation, including exactly how much of the work was done autonomously by the machines themselves, have not been independently confirmed. Responsible reporting means treating those details as still developing. But the wider trend is impossible to ignore. Unmanned vessels, cruising on the surface of the water with nobody on board, are becoming a growing part of modern naval operations. Ukraine has used similar unmanned boats extensively against Russian naval assets in the Black Sea since 2022, reportedly forcing changes in how the Russian fleet operates in that region. Defense analysts have pointed to that story as part of the reason the U.S. has poured money into comparable technology. If accurate, this reported use of an unmanned vessel against a target near Bandar Abbas may be one of the first times the U.S. has used a system like this in this kind of direct role. That is a big deal, regardless of the fine print still being confirmed, because it hints at how future conflicts near coastlines and choke points may look. Machines gliding across the water, no crew on board, working shoulder to shoulder with traditional aircraft and ships. Think about what that shift really means in practical terms. A vessel like this can reportedly travel very long distances without needing a crew, which means no sailors are placed in harm's way during the approach to a defended target. It also means a military can send multiple boats toward the same objective at once, so that even if one is stopped, the mission still finds a way through. Other countries are watching this closely too. Ukraine's experience using unmanned boats against a far larger opposing navy has already shown that this kind of technology can shift the balance in a coastal fight, even without matching your opponent's traditional fleet size. If tools like this become a standard part of how the United States and other militaries operate near contested waters, it could quietly change how naval power itself is measured. Less about how many giant warships a country has, and more about how effectively it can flood the water with smaller, smarter systems. Now, here's something worth pausing on because it says a lot about how this story should be told in the first place. A story like this one moves fast, and plenty of channels will fill in the gaps with guesses dressed up as facts. This breakdown is not going to do that. Where something has been confirmed by multiple credible outlets, that gets stated clearly. Where something is still developing, or based on a single source, that gets flagged too. Because that difference matters more than ever when a conflict is this fresh and this fluid. Alongside the strikes and the unmanned vessel operation, reporting also points to a shift in the kinds of aircraft appearing over the Gulf. According to Gulf News and other outlets citing defense officials, aircraft such as the A-10, an older jet originally designed to fly low and slow in support of ground missions, have reportedly been used in the region to help spot and respond to small, fast boats near the strait. Attack helicopters have reportedly been used in a similar way, tracking small vessel activity and drone threats over open water. Now, at first, that might sound strange. Why bring older aircraft into a modern high-tech fight? But when you slow down and think about it, the reasoning makes sense. Small, fast boats skipping across the surface at high speed are extremely hard for high-altitude aircraft or long-range sensors to identify clearly, especially when you're trying to tell a fishing boat apart from a military one. Aircraft that can fly low, fly slow, and were built to survive taking fire at close range are reportedly well suited to that mission. There is something almost poetic about that part of the story. Most people picture modern warfare as satellites, drones, and long-range precision weapons launched from far away. But when the target is a tiny boat weaving through shallow water near a coastline, some of the most useful tools turn out to be aircraft designed decades ago for a totally different kind of fight, flown low enough that a human pilot can actually see with their own eyes what they are looking at. It is a quiet reminder that human judgment at close range still plays a real role. Separately, officials have confirmed that the United States reimposed restrictions on ships trying to reach certain Iranian ports through the strait, according to reporting from The National and other outlets. At least one tanker attempting to reach an Iranian port was reportedly targeted and disabled after allegedly ignoring warnings. The full details of that specific incident, including exact confirmation of casualties or damage, have not been fully verified by multiple sources and should be handled with appropriate caution. But taken together, these reports paint a picture. Strikes on island and coastal military infrastructure, the reported first operational use of unmanned surface vessels in this kind of direct role, enforcement actions squeezing shipping tied to Iran. Whether or not every last detail proves accurate, the overall pattern points to a serious and fast-moving campaign focused on one narrow stretch of water. So what does all of this actually mean, once you step back from the individual explosions and the individual headlines? Because that bigger picture is where the real weight of this story lives. For decades, Iran's strategy around the Strait of Hormuz has rested on one simple idea. Even a modest military force can create outsized influence over one of the most important waterways on Earth. just by making that waterway feel unpredictable. You do not need the biggest navy in the world to move global oil prices. You just need enough capability and enough willingness to use it. Shipping companies and insurers start recalculating their risk every morning. That strategy has worked to different degrees for a very long time. It is why the islands, the fast boat fleet, and the coastal missile systems all mattered so much. Not because any single piece of it could beat the U.S. Navy in an open fight, but because together they raised the price and the uncertainty of moving through the strait high enough to hurt the world economically. What the reported strikes in July 2026 appear to target, based on official statements, is exactly that entire web of capability. The radar that tracks ships, the missiles that extend Iran's reach, the maintenance facilities that keep submarines running, the fast boats themselves. Chipping away at each piece may not erase the total threat, but it does seem aimed at reducing Iran's ability to keep pressure on shipping over time. It is a strategy built on patience and repetition, rather than one decisive blow. And understanding that single point is the key to understanding almost everything else happening in this story right now. Take a breath here, because if you have made it this far, you are already doing something rare. You are choosing depth over noise, and that is exactly why this channel exists. If you find this valuable, do one more thing. Share this video with just one person in your life who keeps asking what is really going on in the Gulf. Not 5 people, not a group chat, just one. Because one careful share reaches somebody who might otherwise have been fed nothing but panic and clickbait. That is how a clearer story spreads. At the same time, we have to be honest about the limits of what strikes from the air and the sea can actually achieve here. Iran's coastline is a maze. It is dotted with small islands, inlets, and hidden coves, terrain that has historically made it very hard to track and preemptively strike small boats before they are used. You cannot hit a hiding place you do not know exists. And once a swarm of fast boats begins moving toward a target, the window to react safely shrinks in a hurry. That is exactly why reports describe such a wide mix of tools being used together. Aircraft, unmanned vessels, coastal strikes, and shipping restrictions, all stitched into the same effort. It is also worth remembering that Iran has continued to respond throughout this period. Iranian state media has reported retaliatory strikes against locations connected to U.S. military presence in the region, including reported activity near bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan. Just like reports from any side of any active conflict, these claims deserve the same careful, measured treatment as claims about American operations. Confirming the full scale and outcome of any single strike often takes time, and first reports frequently get revised as the dust settles. Beyond the military details, there's a very real economic story humming under all of this, and it is one that touches almost everyone watching. Roughly 110 ships reportedly transited the strait on an average day, carrying oil, gas, and other goods to Asia, Europe, and beyond. Countries like Japan and South Korea lean heavily on oil that flows through this route. When the number of ships willing to make that trip drops, even for a short window, the effects spread outward like a ripple in a pond. Oil prices react quickly to uncertainty in this part of the world, and reports indicate that crude prices moved sharply during this period as the conflict escalated. Higher oil prices push fuel costs higher. Higher fuel costs push shipping costs higher. Higher shipping costs push the price of imported goods, food, and even fertilizer higher in countries thousands of miles away. That is how a conflict in a thin sliver of water between Iran and Oman ends up nudging the bill for someone filling up their car on a completely different continent. And here's the twist that catches most people off guard. None of this requires the strait to actually close completely to leave a mark. Even a partial slowdown, or the higher insurance costs quietly passed along the supply chain, can move prices in visible ways. That is what makes this kind of standoff so different from a traditional battle. The economic pressure does not wait for a clear military ending. It builds in real time, shifting day by day based on how safe shipping companies and insurers believe the route feels right now. There's also a quieter kind of disruption that reports describe unfolding alongside the strikes. Interference with GPS signals in the area, making it harder for ships to confirm exactly where they are. Even when no missile flies, that kind of interference adds real risk for commercial crews trying to steer safely through an already tense environment. It is the invisible layer of this conflict. No smoke, no fire, just uncertainty seeping into every navigation screen. All of this feeds the same underlying truth. Shipping companies and insurers do not need proof that something bad will happen to change how they behave. They only need enough doubt. And right now, based on multiple independent reports, that doubt is thicker than it has been in years. So where does that leave us? As of the most recent reporting available, the situation is still active and still shifting day by day. Officials on both sides have made public statements. Some have been confirmed by multiple sources, others remain unverified. The full picture will only come into focus with time, as more information is confirmed by credible reporting. What does seem clear is that the strategic value Iran has poured into these 3 small islands for more than 50 years is being tested in a way it has never been tested before. The radar systems, the missile positions, and the coastal infrastructure that Iranian officials once called unsinkable and permanent are reportedly facing sustained pressure from multiple directions at once. From the air, from robotic vessels on the water, from economic measures that squeeze shipping access. Whether this leads to a lasting change in how the strait operates or whether it becomes just one more chapter in a decades-long standoff is something only time and careful reporting can answer. History suggests these standoffs rarely resolve quickly, and they rarely resolve in a straight line. What is worth remembering is just how much can hang on a stretch of ocean, only 33 kilometers wide. How 3 little islands can shape oil prices, shipping routes, and international tension. Most people watching this will never sail through the Strait of Hormuz. Most people will never see Greater Tunb or Abu Musa on a map again after today, and that is completely understandable. But almost everyone will feel a small ripple from what happens there. In the price of fuel, in the cost of shipping a package, in the small print of a bill that quietly climbs a little higher. That is the silent power of a choke point like this one. That is why stories like this one deserve slow, careful attention instead of loud, empty headlines. And that is exactly the kind of coverage this channel is built around. So if this breakdown helped you truly understand what is happening, stay close. Because based on everything reported so far, this story is very unlikely to be over. The islands are still there. The tankers are still moving. The world is still watching. And somewhere out there, in a narrow strip of water most people will never see, the next chapter is already being written.